Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make...
You received an order. Obey it.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Can I?
Yeah, you should be. Get out.
What's
Get out.
going on?
Get out the car.
Get out now.
I have not committed any crime.
You're being stopped for a traffic violation. You're not cooperating at this point right now. You're under arrest for. You're being detained. Okay, you're being detained for obstruction of justice.
Traffic violation. I do not have to get out the vehicle. You haven't even told me why I'm being stopped.
Really?
Get
out of the car now. Get out of the car.
Get your hands off me.
Get out of the car.
Get your hands off me. You know what? Get your hands off me.
It's not a problem. Back up, Daniel.
I didn't do anything.
Sir.
Get out of the car now.
Sir, hey, sir.
Get out of the car now.
Sir, look.
I'm trying to talk
Get out.
to you.
Okay.
I'm trying to talk.
I'm going to talk to you.
Out.
Just get out of my car.
Can you please
Get out.
relax? Can
Get
you
out.
please relax?
Get out of the car right now. Now.
This is not how you treat a vet. I'm actively serving this country, and this is how you're going to treat me? I didn't do anything. Whoa, hold on.
Okay.
What's going? Hold on. Watch it.
AO4 OC just deployed.
Get out of the car.
Again, that body cam footage released this weekend. That incident took place in December 2020. After the body camera footage was released this weekend of that incident, one of the officers was now fired, took part in that incident. The lieutenant, the uniformed Army lieutenant, who was inexplicably treated that way by those officers, is now suing over what happened to him in Virginia.
I've been saying we need to abolish American policing as it currently exists. It doesn't work. And we don't seem to have this sort of difficulty when we're talking about any other government agency. So, Nicole, you know, I teach my class of Morgan State students before this. We were having this discussion with a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. And I pointed out to them, I said, what's the graduation rate for high school kids in Baltimore? And the Baltimore graduation rate is only about 80%. People are always screaming, oh my gosh, Baltimore public schools are terrible. They need to be taken over by the state. They need to be taken over by the government. Only 80% of these kids graduate. You know the average homicides that are actually solved by police departments? Only about 35%. You know the number of rapes and sexual assaults that are solved by police departments? You know, less than 60%. You know the percentage likelihood of being shot unarmed as a black person is like 5 times as likely than a white person. Policing doesn't work the way we're doing it right now. And if we had that level of endemic failure in any other government agency, every politician in America would say, not just reimagine, we need to tear this down to the studs and rebuild it. And anything less than that is absolute gaslighting to the tears that this woman was expressing. I am tired of people saying this is a tragedy. We've known it was a tragedy, and no one's doing anything about it. And whether it's a mass shooting in a public school or another black man or another black woman, and I promise you, Nicole, because before this trial is over, I said this when the Derek Chauvin trial began. I was like, we're going to have another shooting before this trial is over. And we have one. If the trial goes another 2 weeks, we'll have another shooting. So we need to start thinking of a different way to approach policing. And if we don't have that conversation, then no one cares about crying tears and no one cares about blood in the streets, because anything else is just window dressing.
We'd be done by now.
Your
It's a simple traffic
drawn.
It's a simple traffic violation.
Mr. Rosario, look, you want to stop in a well-lit area because you're nervous.
Yes.
The whole BLM movement, you're probably nervous and all that. They feel the same way. They're nervous for their jobs and their lives. I get where you're coming from. They get where you're coming from. But let's let this pepper spray kind of wear off and stuff, and then just have an intelligent conversation with them.
So, Jason, as you see, after the incident, they decided to have an intelligent conversation. The young lieutenant drove for 1 minute and 40 seconds after they lit up his vehicle because, as he put it, he was going to a brightly lit area because he feared what might happen. And, of course, look at what eventually happened nonetheless. Jason, what do you make of any or all of it?
Brian, the disgusting racial gaslighting of we can shoot you in the face with pepper spray and now you have to have a calm and reasonable conversation. The fact that this man serves this country, which means combat, and yet still fears the police is exactly why people talk about abolishing the police. Every single one of these instances we're talking about tonight, Brian, are armed, racist, and I'm sorry, it's just racist. When you see the initial video and a guy's like, hey, I'm afraid to get out of the car, and the reaction is, you should be. Why should he be? Why should he be? I'm driving around in a car right now that's got tags on the back, temporary tags, because of where I've moved to. This is something that you can't reform. This is something that you can't train people out of. Police departments need to be abolished in significant ways and rebuilt. I know that seems like a radical idea, but I'm sick and tired of video after video after video of murdered black people. And the president of the United States talking about looting before he talks about endemic violence by the state. There is no reason for an officer to be carrying a gun for a routine traffic stop. There is no reason for an officer to pull out a gun or a taser because somebody has air fresheners and little pine trees flopping back and forth in their windows. That is why people are angry. And until we have political leadership in this country, not just investigations, but political leadership that's willing to say, we have to tear these police departments down, just like a corrupt school, just like a dysfunctional hospital, just like a bad water treatment plant. Until we have that kind of reaction from politicians, we're just going to see this violence over and over and over again, and people protesting and nothing changing.
Professor, now we've come back to you. You know that in the real world, the phrase defund the police had colossal consequences across the country for the Democratic Party, especially depending on the race, just as the phrase abolish the police will. You know the counter argument that, God forbid, you hear a bump in the night in your home or apartment, you call 911. You don't want a social worker showing up tonight. I am guessing you'd rather have an armed police officer if you have trouble in your house.
I'm just as likely to get shot by that cop as I am what the potential intruder is. That's just the reality. That's the reality that I live with every day. And I'll also say this, you know, from a political science perspective, no, it actually, if you look at the one seat that Democrats actually picked up in the state of Georgia, the congressional seat, the woman, the doctor whose name escapes me right now, she was actually out there protesting with Black Lives Matter. This is a white woman. She got elected in Georgia. I know that many people tried to argue. I know that Congressman Clyburn tried to say that defund the police and abolish the police hurt Democrats. There's no statistical information right now, polling information that shows that actually kept anybody from winning their seats. Here's the larger issue. Policing, the way it has functioned in this country, no longer works. If there was a public school where every couple of months you had a kid die in the cafeteria, you would shut down that school. You would fire every teacher. You would rebuild the entire school and say, hey, this isn't working. Kids shouldn't be dying in the cafeteria on a regular basis. If you had an emergency room where doctors and patients were dying on a regular basis for routine checkups, you would say, hey, there is something wrong with this hospital. We got to fire everybody there and start from the beginning. For some reason in America, when we see consistent failures on the part of police departments, suddenly everybody says that can't be abolished. We have everybody from the far right to the far left saying we can get rid of everything from the Environmental Protection Agency to the National Education Board. Why can't we do the same thing with police? There are ideas out there. There are policies. There are ways these can be managed. I'm not saying that you should never have somebody with a gun. I'm not saying that there aren't times that there's an armed shootout that you shouldn't have people there who have guns and weaponry. But the armament level of police and the responsibilities that they're held to do not match. You don't need to have as many cops armed in the way that they are doing social work and traffic stops. And that's where this needs to change. And politicians need to admit that, regardless of how wedded we are to the idea of police keeping us safe, when actually they're actually more dangerous to a lot of black people than they are a place of protection.
U.S. Army Second Lieutenant Caron Nazario filed a lawsuit this month, claiming his rights were violated during an encounter with then Windsor, Virginia police officer Joe Gutierrez and Daniel Crocker. The lawsuit, first obtained by the Washington Post, says Nazario is asking for at least $1 million in damages and for the court to rule his constitutional rights were violated. Nazario's lawsuit claimed he was originally pulled over for not having a rear license plate, but video shows he had a temporary plate in the car window. We should note the video was provided by the attorney for Nazario. Officer Crocker wrote in his report that he believed Nazario was eluding police and called it a high-risk traffic stop. Wonder why, though? Let's take a look.
Get out of the car! Get out of the car now!
What's going on?
What's going on is you're fixing to ride the lightning, son.
Get out the car.
You received an order. Obey it.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Can I?
Yeah, you should be. Get out. Back up.
Whoa, hold on.
There you
What's going? Hold on. I don't. What?
AM4 OC just deployed.
Get out of the car and get on the ground now. You're gonna get it again.
I don't even want to reach for my seatbelt.
Take your seatbelt off and get out of the car.
Nazario heard there saying he didn't want to reach for a seatbelt. One of the reasons why is because sometimes when somebody reaches into their car, they think they're reaching for a gun. I don't know why they put this man in this position. The Army lieutenant was eventually released without being charged. In an incident report from Gutierrez, the officer wrote they decided against charges because they didn't want the stop to affect Nazario's military rank. Are you kidding me?
It really should. It should affect the rank of the officer that behaved extraordinarily.
Nazario's lawyer says the lieutenant was threatened not to report the incident if he didn't want his career destroyed. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam responded in a statement yesterday saying, quote, "The incident in Windsor is disturbing and angered me. I am directing the Virginia State Police to conduct an independent investigation." Officials from Windsor, Virginia said the officers failed to follow use of force policies and Officer Gutierrez has been fired. NBC News has reached out to both officers involved for comment, but has not heard back. And Joe, we watched this video in its entirety. It starts back in the car with the officers before they open the door and even get out. They draw their guns right away. And we said to each other, we'd be afraid to get out if two cops were pointing loaded guns at us, screaming at the top of their lungs. This escalated because there was so much fear involved from the get-go, fear that didn't need to be there.
As a 6'4" white
They
man
pepper sprayed him
from the South, if I were in the lieutenant's position and I had a police officer this out of control, and I was showing my hands, showing my arms outside of the window, and I stated that I was afraid to get out of the car, and for good reason, because this officer was so amped up, out of control, crazy. Then if I were afraid being in that position, what about a black man who has seen time and again throughout his life that black men especially are treated differently than other Americans when it comes to being stopped in the car? And Eddie Glaude, he did everything correctly. He was fearful for good reason. So what did he do? He drove to a well-lit area where everybody could see, hoping that cameras were there. He wanted to make sure that everybody saw everything that happened. They drew their guns on a guy, on a lieutenant, for God's sakes, a lieutenant serving our country, protecting us every day. A lieutenant in uniform who put his hands outside of the car and continued to be told to show his hands, but get out of the car at the same time. Eddie, this was, well, as Mika was saying, this was just absolutely offensive.
A lieutenant who probably has mental health effects from something that happened in America rather than what happened when he was serving abroad. Can you imagine?
Well, and even asking them to take care of his dog in the back seat, who had obviously, or was probably choking on the pepper spray as well. This is disgusting. The governor and the police officers, the people that lead the police officers in this area, in this state, need to figure out how the hell this happened. This is sickening, especially Eddie Glaude. If they are this insensitive during the George Floyd trial, then there really is little hope for this officer or any of these officers.
Right. Right, Joe. So the interesting thing is that this officer may very well get, he was fired. He may very well be hired within, a month or so at another police office, police station. But look, it's very difficult for black folk in this moment to give police officers the benefit of the doubt that they're going to treat us like human beings. Right. So here we have this moment where as soon as you pull into the lighted gas station, Joe, you see that he has a temporary tag in his window. So the very reason for the stop is no longer obtains. And then you get out with your guns pointed and you end up in this situation where this lieutenant is on the ground weeping, asking, why are you treating me like this? And I think it's important for us to connect this moment, Joe, with what we saw last night, because the death, the murder at the end is the consequence of a form of policing that eventuates in the death. So what we have to do is begin to look at how are black folk being policed. Joe, you never have to worry about, you tell me, Mika, you tell me, if you ever have to worry about your child being killed by a police officer because of a traffic stop, getting the call that Dante Wright's father got, do you ever worry that a police officer will kill your child because of air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror? Or that your husband, Joe, will get stopped and then put on the ground, handcuffed, threatened to be lit up with lightning, called a corporal, a specialist, and then when he says, I'm a second lieutenant, told to get on the ground, humiliated, brought to tears. Do you ever think you would experience that? So the killing, the death, is the consequence, y'all, of a form of policing that leads up to the confrontation. That's what we have to address. We always address it at the end. And we're not getting to the process, what happens between the stop and the death that is actually the precipitating events.
And because we don't have time to show the whole thing, I ask everybody at home to please, if you haven't seen it, to do it, because we just showed certain points near the end. You do get a chance to see the buildup on the body cams and how this lieutenant expressed his concerns from the very beginning, that he was afraid to get out of the car. He showed his hands. He went to a well-lit area. He did everything that someone who got pulled over, who was afraid of a police officer who was jacked up and out of control, was afraid that if he got out, he was going to end up dead, just like George Floyd.
And they put him on the ground, and they kept telling him to get on the ground, which I can't even imagine how frightening that must have been. And then here is an exchange that happened after the incident began to settle down in terms of the high emotions at play. And the victim here is standing by a car, and the officers are now trying to explain what happened. This exchange makes me wonder why he's only suing for $1 million. Take a look.
I understand you want to get to a well-lit area, a well-lit area. I get that, but when we follow you that long, look at the climate this day, and against everybody, against us, against y'all,
against everybody.
Really?
I mean, Cedric Alexander, something that I know you hear all the time, something that Mika and I were saying when we were watching this unfold on video was, my God, how many times does this happen when the body cams aren't on? How many times did this happen before we started having body cams, before we started
How could body cams have ever been a debate?
Having cameras on our phones? We're only seeing this now, obviously, because of the technology of the past 10, 15 years. And it shows, you and I have been talking about body cams nonstop. Every police officer in America has to have it. They have to be turned on if an incident like this happens and they don't have it on, then the burden of proof is on them. But Rev, how many times does this happen when the body cams aren't on?
And that is a real fear that we live with every day in our communities. And let me tell you, if it was not for the 21st Century Task Force that President Obama had, there would not be as much body cameras available as there are. I believe Cedric was on that task force. We had to fight for that, and I hope this administration and this Congress will legislate. We've done the demonstration. We need the legislation. This will not stop until bad police, and most police are not bad, but bad police know they will be held accountable, until they know qualified immunity is not going to shelter them, until they know there is a penalty for this. We are faced this morning with this tape with a 20-year-old young man unarmed that is dead, whose family is going to be reaching out to someone. That's where people like me and National Action Network step in. How do we explain this over and over again without changing the laws? The good news is you are right. Many police are now beginning to speak up. For the first time, we saw police officers take the stand in Minneapolis and testify against Chauvin, which I've not seen in the years that I've been out here fighting against police misconduct. I've never seen the blue wall pierced as it has in Minneapolis. But even as that happened, a policeman still can take his gun and shoot and kill right in the same county that this trial is going on. We need to deal with, if there is no legislation, there will not be a change in behavior in bad cops. Bad cops are not going to be converted. They have to therefore be convicted in the court of law if they do what is wrong.
And as you said, be called out by good cops.
Aimed at a completely law-abiding Army lieutenant who was driving home with his dog in the back of his SUV and did absolutely nothing wrong. But he was driving while black, and that seemed to be enough to get him pulled over by two small-town police officers in Virginia with guns drawn on him and screaming at him. The victim of that police abuse is alive tonight. Dante Wright is not. An autopsy report on Dante Wright was released today saying that his killing yesterday was a homicide and that the cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the chest. And that single gunshot caused the clashes last night with police in Minnesota and what we're seeing tonight, the kind of night that has become all too sadly familiar to the people of Minnesota since the police killing of George Floyd there last year. One of the jurors in the trial of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, which completed its 11th day today, is living under that curfew tonight in that Minneapolis suburb of Brooklyn Center, where Dante Wright was shot and killed by a police officer yesterday. The curfew went into effect at 7 p.m. tonight. The chief of the Brooklyn Center Police Force said today that when he showed police body cam video of the shooting, that the killing of Dante Wright was an accident. The chief identified the officer who fired the shot as a woman who was a senior officer in the department. The State's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension has now officially identified that officer as Kim Potter. She's a 26-year veteran of the police department. The police chief said that she thought she was reaching for her taser and intended to fire her taser at Dante Wright, but instead fired her gun. And so what the chief described today was, in effect, another deadly demonstration that police training does not work, that police experience does not work. 26 years of experience is not enough. We need police training in deadly force to work for everyone who takes that training, just like we need pilot training to work for everyone who is trained as a pilot, because with police training and pilot training, if it doesn't work, people die. And this police officer, like every police officer, was fully trained on the difference between reaching for a gun and reaching for a taser. But in the moment when it counted on the street under that self-imposed pressure, all of her training disappeared.
The officer drew their handgun instead of their taser. For informational purposes, we train with our handguns on our dominant side and our taser on our weak side. So if you're right-handed, you carry your firearm on your right side and you carry your taser on the left. This is done purposefully and is trained. As I watch the video and listen to the officer's commands, it is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet. This appears to me, from what I've viewed and the officer's reaction and distress immediately after,
Together,
that this was
we
an
will
accidental
make
discharge
America strong.
that resulted in the tragic death of Mr. Wright.
The police chief explained that Daunte Wright's car was pulled over because it apparently had an expired registration, and then the police discovered the additional crime of air fresheners hanging on the rear view mirror, which is apparently against the law in Minnesota. And then the officers discovered that there was an outstanding warrant for Daunte Wright for a misdemeanor. And so these three potential misdemeanors are why the police decided to make their move on Daunte Wright that ended in his death. Daunte Wright called his mother, Katie Wright, just as the police pulled him over yesterday afternoon at the location where her son was shot and killed. Katie Wright said this.
He said, yeah, they pulled him over because he had air fresheners hanging from his ear. Then I heard the police officer come to the window and say, put the phone down and get out of the car. And Daunte said, why? And he said, we'll explain to you when you get out of the car. And I heard the police officer say, Daunte, don't run. Like a minute later, I called and his girlfriend answered, which was the passenger in the car, and said that he'd been shot.
Oh, wow.
Yes!
Later in the video, we can see Daunte Wright, who has just been shot feet away. Police say he drove for another few blocks before the vehicle crashed. Daunte Wright was found dead at the scene.
And then last night, and maybe not that hard to explain, but very hard to swallow. And then last night in a suburban community just outside Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, a 20-year-old African-American man, Daunte Wright, unarmed, driving with his girlfriend in the car, father of a 2-year-old baby. Mr. Wright told his mother by phone that he was being pulled over for having an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. Police say they pulled him over for having expired registration tags, although it should be noted that Minnesota, like many states, did have delays in issuing registration tags during COVID. It's unclear what was the exact origin of this traffic stop, but police say when they ran Mr. Wright's ID, it turned out he had an outstanding warrant on a misdemeanor. So they decided they would use this traffic stop to arrest him. They got him outside the car. It was 2 male officers. Body camera footage released by the town's police chief today is body camera footage from a 3rd officer, from a female officer. And I should warn you, this video is not easy to watch. It is disturbing. You can see from the body camera that was worn by a third officer, female officer. She moved in closer to Mr. Wright while he was being handcuffed by one of the officers. Some kind of sudden movement that ensued, some kind of scuffle. The officer wearing the body camera screams, "I'll tase him, I'll tase you." And then she says, "Taser, taser, taser." And then she shoots Mr. Wright, but she does not shoot him with a taser. She shoots him with her gun. And immediately thereafter, the officer says, "Holy bleep, I shot him." Mr. Wright then drives off at speed, having just been shot. The other officers look at the officer who's wearing the body cam. The one with the handcuffs says, "Oh, wow," when she says, "I shot him." Mr. Wright then drives a short distance, and he crashes, and he's dead. "I just shot him," she says. She says, "Taser, taser, taser." And she shoots him. The officer appears to realize that she did not tase him. She shot him. The autopsy report released tonight says this individual died of a gunshot wound of the chest, and the manner of death is homicide. Daunte Wright's girlfriend, I mentioned, was in the car when he was shot. And as you saw there in the video, after the shooting, Mr. Wright drove away. He did drive a short distance before then crashing, and he died. His girlfriend apparently called Mr. Wright's parents from the car. Mr. Wright's father then reportedly raced to the scene and was there within less than 10 minutes of this happening, his son laying dead on the street when he got there. Now, the officer who shot Daunte Wright is on leave now following this incident yesterday. The mayor has called in the department to fire her while the matter is being investigated. But this all happened just yesterday, and it happened 10 miles from the courthouse where Derek Chauvin is on trial. Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer charged with murder and manslaughter for the death in custody last year of George Floyd, another Minneapolis African-American man whose unarmed interaction with police on a low-level law enforcement matter ended with him dead in the street. Last night, in and around Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, angry protesters demonstrated. They broke windows and looted some businesses. They turned their anger against the local police station. The National Guard was ultimately activated. A vigil for Daunte Wright started tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock local time in this Minneapolis suburb. And tonight, protesters are gathered outside of police headquarters at Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. The mayor of Minneapolis, I mentioned this is sort of a Minneapolis suburb. The mayor of Minneapolis today declared a state of emergency in Minneapolis. 4 counties, including basically the whole Minneapolis and St. Paul metropolitan area, instituted a curfew tonight. People not being allowed out on the street. Major League Baseball, Major League Hockey, Major League Basketball games were all scheduled tonight in the Minneapolis metro area. All of those games have been called off, as again, most of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area is under a curfew. And of course, this is all happening where and while
together,
former Minneapolis police officer
America
Derek Chauvin is standing
again.
trial for the alleged murder of George Floyd last year.
We will make America wealthy again. We will make America safe again. And yes, we will make America great again.
You about to lose your job. You about to lose your job. Get this dance. You about to lose your job. You about to lose your job. Get this dance. You about to lose your job. Oh my goodness. You about to lose your job. Get this dance. You about to lose your job. Get this dance. You about to lose your job. You about to lose.
I let you motherfuckers think y'all run everything. Motherfucker. What? Motherfucker. You owe me some money, motherfucker. You motherfucker. motherfuckers talking about? Motherfucker, I eat everything. I eat the pussy, I eat the butt, I eat every motherfucking thing. Motherfucker, I'll chew his ass up. Motherfucker. You a smart motherfucker. English, motherfucker. Motherfucker. We're not gonna store the motherfucker. I'm on the motherfucker. Motherfucker, I'm a mushroom cloud laying motherfucker. Ha. You're closed, motherfucker. Sewer rat may taste like pumpkin pie, but I never know because I wouldn't eat the filthy motherfucker. The one that said bad motherfucker. That's not bad. Goddamn motherfucker. Racist motherfucker. Motherfucker. What do you got out here? That's right, run, motherfucker. Motherfucker shit don't stink. Mouse Patil looking motherfucker. Sit your motherfucker. That motherfucker, cause I'm a bad.